Welcome to the 17th episode of When Life Hands You Lemons. I'm thankful that you've made it here and are supporting me yet again this week. I can't thank you enough for all of the support you've given me since the launch of the show. So this is one of my favorite conversations that I've had with one of the guests on the show. This one is with Mr. Elliot Jacobson. He's a session and touring drummer for Ingrid Michaelson as well as Elle, and he's had quite an interesting story kind of growing into the music industry. He came from a non-musical family and found his passion with drumming, and he shares a lot of his interesting stories through what he's done in the studio and some of the criticism he's taken and how he's taken that criticism, whether it be harsh or not harsh enough, and kind of manifested it into something that he can learn from. So we also dive into a little bit of how to protect yourself within the music industry and with contracts, with copyrights, and how money kind of flows in and all that stuff kind of works, because it can be very complex. And from a musician's standpoint of Mr. Elliot and how he's been a session and touring drummer and how he's kind of learned and kind of made a living by doing some of these things. So before we jump in and I get started with the conversation with Elliot, I want to remind you to please sign up to my mailing list, as it helps me notify you when new episodes like this are live, as well as I'll send some tips and tricks and some motivational things over your way to keep you going and following your passions and your dreams. There's also a link in the show notes below for my Patreon, and there's different tiers there where you can even work with me and I can help you out and consult with you on some of the things that you're working on. And the money that I make through Patreon will go directly back into the show to help it grow and make it better for all of you. I would also greatly appreciate a 5-star rating and review within Apple Podcasts or whichever platform that you listen in, as it greatly helps the show grow and help it be discovered by new listeners such as yourself. Lastly, there is a guest request form, so if you or somebody you know would be a good guest for the show, there is a link below to fill that out and or send it over to somebody you know so that I can reach out to them and we can potentially have them on the show if they are a good fit. So without further ado, I want to let Elliot kind of tell us a little bit about himself and his journey, and then we get talking on all things the music industry. Please enjoy my conversation with Mr. Elliot Jacobson. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule and your day to kind of sit down and have a conversation with me. I'm excited to have you on the show, and I'm excited for our conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited too.
Yeah, no problem. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and who you are and how you got into music?
Sure. Well, I'm a drummer. I'm a producer. I'm a songwriter. I started playing violin when I was really young, when I was in kindergarten, and I did that for about 4 years. I was always listening to music as a kid from really my dad would just play music in his car when he'd drive me around, to school or, whatever we were doing on weekends. So that was really, I think, where I got the influence from. I mean, my parents weren't really musically talented. I didn't grow up around a lot of musicians, but that had a big impact on me, I think, just listening to Beach Boys, Righteous Brothers, a lot of like 50s music starting out. And then I took up drums when I was in 6th grade, and it was just like you choose your elective kind of situation, and it's kind of a ridiculous story, but I was I had to go and kind of choose your elective, and I ended up in the drummer line because all my friends were standing there, and I didn't really think twice about it. And so I took concert band in middle school. And then I started taking private lessons with like an old jazz drummer, Tom Ferris, in Houston. And so I grew up in Houston. And I really got to learn my way around the kit, and I decided that was something I was really passionate about, and just kind of kept going all through high school. And there's a lot of other things going on along the way, but drums has really been the constant for me. And in college, I was continuing to play, and that's where I really got serious. I think as a professional, I started playing with some musicians that, were really trying to accomplish something. And one of them was Ingrid Michaelson, and I still play with her today. It's been at least 13 years that I can remember, because we just did our 13th annual holiday hop in New York, which is her annual Christmas holiday extravaganza. And then, outside of Ingrid, Elle King, I played with her pretty consistently for, I think it was at least 4 years. At the beginning with her, it was a little sparse because the record wasn't out, but she had an EP, so we were doing, some Rockwood shows in New York, and we played Letterman, and then we started doing some more tours, and the album came out, and it was just crazy. The schedule was pretty out of control. Just great opportunities, and not a lot of sleep. And I guess in backtracking a little bit, in college and out of school, I was really active with other artists too, and doing smaller tours and playing around town and getting involved in session work. And, so that's sort of the abbreviated version, I guess.
That's great. So I can, like you had said, there's not getting a lot of sleep. That's pretty much welcome to the music industry 101. So you started working, you've been playing with Ingrid Michaelson for 13 years now. How did you kind of get into that? Did you just kind of, you kind of known her prior to actually playing professionally with her, correct? And kind of moving on before she kind of exploded, right?
Yeah, it was really in the very beginning. I mean, she was doing kind of like at the time, it was like a Nora Jonesy sort of piano, vocal, upright bass, drums thing. And then eventually expanded into like more of a full band sound, adding different members. But yeah, I mean, she was just around town and needed a drummer, and someone knew that I could play and recommended me. And it was just a really natural thing. I wasn't auditioning. It wasn't, she wasn't like established at the time, like she obviously became later. So it was a really natural, kind of organic, I just happened to know somebody, and, that's really how that started.
And how did the Elle King one come about? Is that kind of a similar situation?
Totally different situation. I was doing a session with a couple producers in New York they were working with the band Train, and I was at the time doing a lot of session work for these producers, and I played on a song, and at the time Elle was singing vocals on that song as a duet, and the producers were like, do you know about Elle King? And I was just there to, play drums. I was just focused on what I was doing. And I had no idea. And they were so excited about her. And I went and looked her up and just did some research and tried to find who she was. Because she did have an incredible voice, even though I was just listening to one track and I wasn't really familiar with everything else. And we started emailing and connecting and realizing we knew some people in common, and she knew some of the people I was playing with and knew about Ingrid. And I was touring with Jenny Owen Youngs at the time. She's a really close friend of mine, now lives in LA, but she was out here, and I was doing a lot of drumming on her records. And Elle was a fan, and we just talked about that. I remember her saying, one day I hope I can tour in a van too. You know, she was like really excited about it. So we started a friendship and just hung out. And I remember one day we got French fries, and she's like, I just got signed to RCA that day. And, you know, we just kind of carried on like that. And then there was an opportunity where she needed a drummer that was a little more dedicated and asked me to start playing with her. So that's a really kind of roundabout way. That's the most unusual way I think I've ever started to work with somebody.
So it sounds like you've basically had all of these opportunities come about because of your professionalism and dedication to your craft. So it sounds like with Elle King, she said that she needed somebody that's a little more dedicated. Were her previous ones not as dedicated as you? And how come that has brought you so many opportunities? And why is that so important, especially being a musician in such a tough industry?
Well, with Elle, I think it was the timing that she knew, and she, to this day, I think she has the same mentality that, and Ingrid as well. I think they both really knew that they needed a band, even though they are the front of the whole operation. They are the boss. They're the beginning, the end. They're the artist. You know, it's not like a democracy situation. You know, they knew they needed a group of people that they could depend on. You know, generally speaking, but specifically, like, you know, we're trying to book this tour. We need to know that people can be there for it, you know, or something might pop up. And in the early days of all this stuff, you know, it's really sporadic. You know, you don't know what you're going to get. And things are less dialed in. You know, with Ingrid, the first tour we did was opening up for Dave Matthews Band in stadiums, which is crazy. I mean, that's not how it happens. You don't go out. That's not your first tour. But that's just what happened, and we were all like, "Okay, we're ready to go. We're in it. You know, we're dedicated to her. We believe in the music. We believe in her." And with Elle, I think at that moment, to answer your question, she was, you know, looking for those type of musicians. You know, people that she could depend on. And I think that it's a tough balance as a side person, you know, quote unquote, like I am, you know, in those situations where you need to be diverse and work with different artists, and balance that. But you also do need to sort of be along for the ride, because I mean, and I can get into this pretty deep, but you know, you need to realize that it's not, in those situations, it's not really about you. And I see that more now than ever in hindsight. You know, doing some of the work that I do now is, you know, I do some management work, I do production, you know, I do songwriting. So I'm on multiple sides of this, but I think that it's easy for people starting out to get wrapped up in, like, you know, their own sound as a musician, and which is really important, and their own, you know, influences and what they want to bring to the table. But I think you really have to be, you know, not to sound preachy or anything, but I think you have to realize that it's bigger than you. And if you can fit into those situations and be whatever you need to be, whatever's needed at the time, you know, which for both of those artists in particular was, you know, dedication and focus and dependability, you know. And I think, especially as a drummer musically, I have to be that type of player. You know, I have to be solid and dependable. But I think in those situations, you know, and when Ingrid was growing too, there was more opportunity, and, you know, we kind of had to just be ready to pick up and go. And if I was worried about getting, you know, 10 other gigs with other artists and, you know, just jumping on anything I could take, I would not have been able to put that dedication in. And same thing with Elle, really.
It's important that you said that. I'm glad that you did say that. You kind of have to put yourself aside and put your kind of ego aside, because it's so important. I've heard that even in some jobs, especially with the creative ones, where there's times when you can speak up and there's times when you kind of just follow the lead. Sometimes your opinion is not necessary, especially when it's not asked for. And that is especially true within a situation like what you had, where you kind of have to put everything aside, put all of your beliefs, your opinions, whatever you have against whoever or whatever the situation may be, and just kind of go with the flow and put forth your best effort in your professionalism and your craft and what you're good at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you need goals for yourself.
Right, right.
You need to have a bit of foresight and vision for what you're trying to do, because if you're kind of just, you don't want to be drifting along and someone calls you for a 6-month tour. And I almost went to India on a tour once. I was in between tours with Ingrid, and I had some time, and but I didn't do it because it wasn't well planned out. I could see that there was going to be a lot of issues. There wasn't a proper tour manager, and that's a huge undertaking, some kind of international travel, and if there's a lot of unknowns, you don't want to, you need good judgment. But I think if you can see some kind of infrastructure, within the organization, like, people who have a shared vision, that are focused, that are hardworking, and the talent's there, and then, yeah, you kind of just you got to do it. You got to commit, really. And I think that for both of those situations, that is important. I mean, I still have those relationships with both of those artists, in different capacities. So, absolutely, I totally agree with that.
Right. So just put your egos and everything aside. And like you said, keep yourself to have goals or put yourself to have goals. But remember to use these types of things as stepping stones to those goals.
Sure. Definitely.
Can you put in your description that you are a session drummer and a touring drummer? Now I know you kind of talked like you're touring with Elle King or Ingrid, and that basically explains what a touring drummer is. But can you explain what a session drummer is and a touring drummer and kind of how they correlate with each other and how they differentiate from each other?
Yeah, to me, they're completely different. You can have drummers and any musician that do both very well, but I think the set of skills, at least in my experience, is so different. There's certain things that overlap. I think a session drummer essentially, I'm being called maybe as late as the day of or the morning of a session to go in and be a mercenary, just, play the parts that are already decided by the producer and the artist, or come in and kind of like make up a drum arrangement for the song. And maybe I know the song, maybe I don't. Maybe it's something I've worked on with the artist before. Maybe it's just I've gotten calls, excuse me, from producers where, they just got the demo finished the night before, and there's no time to prep, and so there's a lot of last minute stuff, and some of it's not really because there's like an organization problem. Sometimes that's just how the process goes. So you're just, I guess, again, like, you're just sort of, you have to just be ready for anything, and if you want to be open to those opportunities, you have to just say yes, and you have to go in. So, I'd go in, I'd lay down drums, I'd play percussion sometimes. The goal being to get in and out as quickly as possible. At least that was always my goal. Make sure that I give them everything they need in the first few takes. And if there's any more takes than that, it's because they want to try different things. They want me to add some creativity, maybe some experimentation. It's not because I can't get the part down or my performance is lacking energy or something. So yeah, that's as far as like a session drummer, and I would do it with multiple artists, producers, sometimes people I've never met before. It really just depends on the day, really, and it could be one song, it could be a whole album in a day. I've done that several times. Could be just me in the studio with the engineer and the producer, could be other musicians all tracking together, any combination of that, really.
Cool. So the session drummer is really kind of an all-encompassing thing. You go in, you do your thing, and you leave.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and as far as the touring thing, I mean, the set of skills for that, I'd say, are it's a little bit more of a being a versatile person, I think. And maybe, maybe like, if I'd have to say, like, the session drummer is maybe more of a versatile player. I mean, you have to have your thing, and you're being called to do something because of how you do it, but like your sound or your style. But I think you have to be versatile musically on the spot and be able to think really quickly. If they're making changes immediately, you have to just adapt to that. And I think as a touring musician, touring drummer, you have to be more dependable, consistent player. At least for the pop stuff that I usually do and like the rock stuff. I mean, you're literally the backbone of the groove and of the sound. And if that's going to go, if you're going to change things up and choose, one night to be really creative, that might not be the vision of the singer, or where the artist is that night. Maybe they're more, they want to play by the books. You kind of have to follow a little bit more and not take as many liberties, I think. It's like calculated a little bit more. And as a person, you just have to be more versatile so that you fit into the social situation. You match the demeanor of everybody around you. You're not a distraction. You're sort of fitting into the group, really. So I think, like, because touring is such a you're on the road. It's like a lifestyle, really. When you're doing it consistently, so you just have to be a good citizen, a good roommate, and sort of fit into that context.
And have you ever had a situation where you've gone into the studio kind of blindly, just so you were called in, and the producer turns out to be kind of a jackwagon, or the artist is kind of pushy, or it just doesn't go at all the way you were thinking?
Nothing comes to mind, but I know, I've been lucky because a lot of people I work with are friends, people that are very professional, very good at what they do. If anyone's pushy in the studio, I just look at it as, I don't give any resistance. If someone wants me to do one take, and this has happened, if someone wants me to do the same take, same groove, same pattern, same sound 100 times, I'm down. I'm ready. That's, if they want me to play the song 100 times, 100 different ways, I have to be ready for that. If they tell me that I'm not getting it, it's not right. I just have to trust them. And I usually do, unless they ask me what I think. And if I really don't think that we're getting anywhere different, I might say, we'll try to get down to the heart of what they really want. Maybe they're asking me to do something 100 times because they need something else from me. And, if they give me a little different direction, or if I ask the right question, that's going to really inspire, what I play. And if an artist is, artist or producer is really after something, and they might not take the right road, in my opinion, to get there, I still have to go down that road with them. And I guess I've been in that situation a couple times where maybe I don't agree with, like, the parts that they are asking me to play, or the approach, or maybe the feedback they're giving me in my mind doesn't really, they might say, you need to play more on top of the beats. And, what they really mean is, they want me to be more exciting. Maybe I'm playing dead on the click or a little ahead, and it's still not working for them. So maybe there's something, that they're not articulating properly, or maybe they just don't know. A lot of times they don't know what they want. So I try not to see it as pushy ever. I try to just be wide open and, just, I guess like a canvas, really. I can bring in my ability to have good sound when I play, to hit hard, to bring excitement to the track, to come up with a part that supports the music and the vocals, if there are vocals at that point. But other than that, it's really, like, up for grabs.
And I'm assuming you could use these opportunities as well to kind of learn and better yourself or your craft, even be like, oh, play more on top of the beat, like, oh, or play it like this, or play it with a little bit of swing, like, oh, I never thought about trying it like this. And then you kind of, as you're playing, you kind of teach yourself something new within that moment. And then you're kind of building upon that.
That's true. And I've come out of sessions, actually, that's a really good point, where, maybe they asked me to do something and I didn't really feel like I was killing it in that moment. Like oh, I wish I could have, like, I think there was maybe one session where I was asked to play like to me, it was like a crazy bass drum, like kick drum pattern that was really busy, and the song was really fast already. So, I couldn't really, I'm not like a punk drummer. I can't really just pull that kind of vocabulary out without warming up to it and without maybe spending a couple days sort of internalizing that. And I remember walking out of that session realizing that I was just kind of reaching for it, and I should have just been able to pull it out, and just immediately take on that, really own that direction, But that's happened a couple times, and then I realized, like, especially being called back by certain producers and artists, I know what they like. So I've gotten certain types of cymbals or started tuning my drum a certain way, or certain ideas I'll bring into the table whenever they open it up and say, why don't you give us like a take that something we haven't heard. And I'm still playing to their sensibilities because I know what they like. I know what they don't like. So definitely, like, coming out of some of these sessions, I've taken some things with me and tried to improve or like be better equipped next time.
Right. So earlier in the episode, you talked a little bit about you've done kind of every kind of facet of the creative side. You've done producing, songwriting, you're the drummer, you're the touring drummer, all this stuff. What was it like kind of the first time or even the second time transitioning from being like the drummer and then kind of being on the other side of the board, being kind of behind the board and then looking at the other drummer or looking at the vocalist kind of producing everything?
Well, I guess to me, it was a little bit of a natural progression because, the situations I've always been in as a drummer, there was like a level of collaboration. So, so I had that kind of perspective already, where we'd be commenting on each other's parts or trying to, I would take direction from people, but also maybe give a little bit of direction or input, while doing these sessions that, like we're very, like, I'm like an open blank page kind of situation. So, I guess like I kind of started producing and writing because I had these ideas, I had the creativity, and I think being a drummer too, at least in my experience, you're already kind of sitting back and observing everything. And you to be a good drummer, to be like a great drummer, a great musician, you have to listen really well. I think you more so than playing. I think you need to have your skill set down. You need to be technically proficient. You need to have some practice going on, and whatever degree that is. But I think just having the ability to listen to other people and to respond to those things, that was sort of the first thing that helped me get into production. I had a lot of people encouraging me to do it too, other producers. So to direct another drummer or to come up with other parts, arrangements or bass lines or whatever, I already was kind of aware of that through the other session work I was doing. And I think that as far as production goes, that was like the main link there, was just being able to listen and having those opportunities to do that.
And I think that's not only just in the studio or being a producer or a musician, is being able to take feedback from anybody and anybody, regardless of how harsh it may be, because at the end of the day, that's somebody else's opinion and somebody's viewpoint where something you might not have even thought about. So kind of taking that into accommodation and kind of moving forward with that and trying that, you might, like you said, better yourself.
That's true. And these artists, that I've been really, really lucky to work with and continue to work with. I mean, they have big visions and big ideas, and there's not a lot of room for, hey, I'd love to try to play this crazy fill here, or what if we make the drum beat a little more, syncopated or something. I mean, there's moments for that, but it's like I kind of feel like a lot of the parts that I've worked on for the records or live arrangements or whatever, just sort of fitting into what's all the framework that's already there. And yeah, I think you got to trust the artist, you got to trust the bigger vision, and don't. I could never really think in terms of like, I'm a drummer and I need to show them what I need to like shine through the track or shine through the song. So I think being a producer, I really couldn't care less what the drums are doing as long as it works. I couldn't care less if the bass player that is on the track is letting everybody know how slick he or she is, as a player. Even the vocalist, like if the vocalist just has great pitch, great tone, can sing, every run. I really don't care if I feel like the listener is not going to really feel the message of the song. And then even down to the song, I don't care how clever the lyrics are. I don't care how unique the melody is. If it doesn't communicate a real message, I don't really care. So it really just reduces everything. Being a producer and I think being like really inside the music as a session musician, whatever, like creator, essentially, you're just constantly reducing these smaller roles to just get to deliver the bigger message, the message of the artist, the message of the song, and trying to discover what those things are and then trying to deliver it the best way possible.
Cool. So you're more so on like the live side of things or in the recording side of things. I want to transition a little bit into like the music, the marketing side of things. Once everything is done and it's ready to go, what does it feel like to be like that's me, or hearing it on the radio, or hearing it on a DVD, or hearing it played on YouTube, or hearing like your drumming played in like a Snapchat video and kind of marketing that? What's that like? Is that kind of a crazy feeling?
It's crazy. I mean, it's just like the icing on the cake. I think it's never expected. Even now, I just like if I finish work on something, I mean, it might not be released. That's sort of the nature of the industry now, or not even the industry, just the way people are making music and releasing it. So if something gets to be released, even if I played drums on someone's album, for Ingrid, for example, would sometimes track more songs than she would release. So there's no guarantee really what's going to make the album, what's going to make the EP, what's going to be the single. And certainly not as a producer or songwriter either. There's so many factors as to what's going to make it out. So it's just really exciting when things do come out, and I love that people are going to share this. It's something I've spent a lot of time on, or even if it was one day in the studio, or whatever capacity I was working on it. It is really exciting to see people getting into the music and just knowing that it's communicating and it's out there in the world.
And making sure that it is being communicated. Are you playing like an integral part within the marketing aspect, or do you just kind of sit back and kind of let everybody else do that, like the publicist or whoever?
As a drummer, I wasn't, I'm not really a part of that process. I'm trying to, it's more micro, where I'm just trying to really give the best take I can give, the best version of the drums for that moment. It's like very moment and specific stuff. And if I'm producing and songwriting, I always kind of get into these conversations with artists, even if it's just a brief kind of thing where I'm curious to know what they think about the release and what their branding strategy is for themselves, and the strategy for the music, and what their vision is for it, and if they have one, and if they don't, maybe trying to help them. And there's some artists that I work with on a deeper level where I am playing a bigger part in that, and there's somewhere it could be just a kind of conversation where we're just bouncing ideas around. But it's something I'm passionate about, because I think it's especially now, it's just all part of the same thing. You can't really separate the making a record and then you're just sort of washing your hands like, okay, well, now someone else is going to take over. That's not really that's it still is like that, but not on every level. So I tend to get involved in that when I can, or when it's the right situation. And I'm doing a lot of work on that now currently.
Okay, so I just had today's podcast episode for mine. I had a guest, his name is Brandon Jackson, and we had a conversation about how important it is for musicians and artists like yourself to kind of learn and understand the music business side of things, rather than just being able to go into a studio, write music, and then go home. Having that basic understanding of marketing, social media, how to write a nice email, how have those kind of traits, or has that kind of business knowledge that you've learned over the years translated and helped your career?
Wow. Yeah.
Kind of a loaded question.
Yeah, but I get really excited about this stuff, and anyone that knows me knows that I just, especially people I work with, and I'm friends with, I mean, we talk about this stuff a lot. So, as a drummer, first and foremost, I think, you need to have a bit of marketing and a bit of a branding strategy for yourself. I mean, there's so many ways you can do that. And I think that's super important to get yourself out there. Now, when I was coming up, we didn't have Instagram. For a little while, we didn't even have YouTube. That wasn't like in full bloom yet. But now it sort of depends on what target you want to hit. I guess for an example, for a drummer, you don't necessarily want to put up all these gospel chops, kind of really busy playing videos if you're trying to tour with someone like Elle or Ingrid, or I don't know, someone that's more of a songs type artist. You might want to show that you can play a groove really well and sound really good and look good and feel good. So it's important to know your audience, just like in any other type of branding or marketing. You can have all these beautiful videos, but if the content just isn't right, or if you're like a Broadway musician and you're trying to get on tour and you have all these Broadway shows of you playing in the pit, that might not be the right thing. It might turn off some people. Nothing against Broadway musicians, but it's a totally different lane. You might need to get some gigs where you can show that you can play a different style of music in a different environment. So that's sort of one example of it. And I think that as a, just you need to have the branding strategy for yourself. You need to know who you are and what you're after, what your goals are. And it's so important to use social media. It's so important to post in a genuine way, so that you're not faking it. You're letting people know who you are. I don't think it's about oversharing either. And especially for or musicians like drummers, you know, your boss might not be so excited that you're taking like Instagram stories of every little thing that goes on. You know, they like a little bit of privacy and secrecy, and I mean secrecy is maybe too strong, but you know, a little bit of like separation. You know, because sometimes if you're trying to really be a serious drummer and a serious musician, you know, you're going to be traveling with these artists and you're going to be a part of their lives, and you don't necessarily need to post every little thing and promote yourself every little second, but you know, you should show people that you're touring and show people that you're working, and at least give them a place to look for these things. I've always tried to keep a good website, you know, where people can see, if they want to look, they can see what I've done. They can see what music I've worked on, what releases have come out, examples of my work, so they can hear how I play. You know, and then social media, where I'm just telling people where I am and what I'm doing, you know, who I'm out with. I have sponsors, you know, so it's nice for them to see what I'm doing and for me to promote the products that I use all the time, you know. So you can tell me if I'm drifting here, because there's just so much to talk about with this.
No, like I said, it's kind of a loaded question, and there's so much to talk about. And like I had talked about with Brandon on that episode, was when musicians are just focusing on writing music and they're just uploading it to, say, SoundCloud. I come from an electronic music background, so everything is kind of computer music. Nothing is, well, things are played live, but for the most part, it's done in the computer. Sounds are created through synths and samples, and everything is completely zeroed out and as loud as it possibly can be. There's no dynamics. But we were also talking about how important it is. So say, for example, you wanted to take your career to the next level. What should you be looking for in a manager? What should you be looking for in a tour? If your track gets signed to a label, what should you be looking for in a contract? Now, I'm not saying you have to be a lawyer, but you should have a basic understanding of, if a contract gets handed to you and it's very poorly written and it says that the label is going to keep 90% of the royalties, that's probably not a good deal. You should have that understanding and knowledge. So it sounds like you've got that really good understanding and how it's helped your career immensely.
Yeah, right. So, you know, originally I wanted to get into the business side. When I was in college, I was interning for every record label that would take me. Every semester I was interning. I wanted to work in A&R. You know, it's like the old school kind of dream of, and this was like right around the time when, like right when iTunes was coming out, and like, I think Napster had just kind of like, that wave had gone. And anyway, so the music industry obviously changed dramatically, and then has continued to change dramatically, like every year, basically. But
Every day.
Yeah. So I was really excited about the industry side, even being a drummer, and even at the time, I was playing with Ingrid. You know, it was still in the early days, but you know, I didn't really see myself going out and touring in particular, you know, or producing or writing. I was more like, you know, I was doing those things in a small capacity, but I was more excited about the business. You know, and my first job out of college was working at a publishing company on the admin side. And so that was like what I thought I was going to do. So I guess like almost my roots are almost just as much in the business side of it. You know, I've always been exposing myself to that, you know, while I've been working on the creative side. And now I feel like things are almost coming full circle with the work I'm doing now, because it's all sort of overlapping each other. And just like the way the industry is now, like you said, I mean, you have to really have a grasp on all these things. I have a great music attorney that's taught me so much. I mean, I've learned a lot of it kind of on my own through different contracts I've been involved in with artists, and, you know, as a producer, you know, making deals, negotiating, even just like small things like splits and day-to-day things. But there's still so many artists and producers and songwriters that are doing this and like don't really have a grasp of it, and sometimes they can get away with it because maybe they do have a team that's handling it. But I totally agree. The more you know about it and the more you're exposing yourself to it, the better. Yeah.
Right. I'm kind of in that situation now where I'm kind of interested in the business side of things because I want to learn the back end, because it's kind of like you see those pictures of like an iceberg of what success looks like or what people see, and then you see like the water and you see the rest of the iceberg below it and what actually happens. That's kind of what the music industry is. You see that tip of the iceberg above the water, but you don't see what's below the surface. There's all this stuff that goes on behind the show. Like, for example, when you watch a live performance at, say, the Ellen DeGeneres show or Jimmy Kimmel, the amount of connections and phone calls and contracts and everything that had to go on behind the scenes to put on that 5-minute performance is beyond most people's comprehension, and a lot of artists don't understand that. I did an episode with an entertainment lawyer earlier. She's a friend of mine. She used to teach at the college that I went to, and now she's kind of helped me out with some basic questions and kind of learning and pointing me in the right direction on a couple things. But she's told me some stories of clients that she had, and she's had a client where they had downloaded a contract or the other person had downloaded a contract and they were about to sign this contract, and they brought it to her to review it first, of course, which they did correctly. And she asked them, well, who's from Finland? Well, nobody. Why? Well, she's like, well, it says right here in the contract that somebody's from Finland. So she's like, do not sign this because it's not going to be legal. There's no jurisdiction here. It's a contract for Finland. You would have to, if something were to happen, you'd have to fly to Finland and dispute it there. I'd be completely useless to you. So it's just things like that artists should be able to catch. Like, you read a contract and it says, oh, this is in the jurisdiction of Finland. Like, that should have been caught.
Right. I mean, you'd think, but there's I get handed contracts from from managers all the time that are like these form contracts, and still have this other information maybe from like a previous deal, and just someone's not paying attention or someone's too busy. But it is interesting that some people don't know to look for those things, or even if they are competent, or I guess if they're, those things can slip through the cracks if you're really busy and you're doing a lot of different deals. But I think like in that situation, some people wouldn't even know how to read for something like that, how to read a deal, and the different types of deals. And I don't know if the answer is that everyone needs, who wants to do this professionally needs like a class. But I think that it's like, as soon as you feel like you're at a level where you're somewhat comfortable. I mean, no one's ever, that's a whole other thing. Artists feeling comfortable, that's like a fleeting thing. But but like if you feel like you have some competency as a creative, you gotta really feel that same competency as a business person. I think or at least try. At least I'm working with a couple artists right now where I'm saying, they might ask me questions and I'll say like, I can give you answers and, but what do you think this means? And try to get them to figure it out on their own, just to sort of press that button, or motivate them to just seek it out and figure it out. Cause I think you learn better that way if you've discovered it yourself. And, in the same way as most musicians and artists kind of have to go on that discovery creatively. I think if you go on that discovery, it's just a theory of mine, but for a creative person to learn the business side, I think it has to be very interactive. I think they have to really feel it and touch it and be, otherwise it just seems like so distant and
and then they try to kind of pawn it off on somebody else. Well, I don't really understand that, and you just do it. Well, what if I'm not here next week and you have to kind of deal with this yourself for the day or the next week or month, and I'm not going to be here to help you? What are you going to do? You're going to be up with your hands in the air, and things are going to get prolonged and procrastinated and done incorrectly, and now we're going to have a bigger issue and a bigger mess to clean up.
Yeah, yeah, it's just so important, and especially artists starting out, or musicians starting out. I mean, even as a drummer, I think you should understand, when you play on a track, what's gonna, where does the money flow? Who's getting paid? Because, I mean, this is breaking it. This is a little bit of a deviation here, but if you're a session drummer and you're trying to negotiate your rates, or you're trying to negotiate your rates as a touring musician, and you don't really know the bigger scope of like the budget that's involved and who's getting paid and from where they're getting paid, and you might ask for too little, you might ask for too much, and you might look like you're just an amateur because you don't really understand how this works and how you fit into it. Just like if you're on the complete opposite end and you're the artist, and you're trying to put together a plan and goals, and you don't understand how much all this is going to cost, or the type of deals you're going to need to put in place, and maybe legal fees that it's going to take, and if your goal is to get signed, like you said, by a label, like what does that actually mean? Is that really good for everybody? Or a distributor, is it the right time for that? And business wise, is that going to make you money? Is that I mean, there's endless, just like in the creative world, there's endless, kind of paths you can go. I think it's the same thing with business. I try to talk like that when I'm speaking to creative people, because it's just trying to draw parallels between business and creative and not separate them as much as possible.
Yeah. And I could talk about like copyrights and like royalties and all this stuff. While I might not be the most knowledgeable about it, I love learning about it, and it can get incredibly complex. Like I had that conversation with the lawyer a couple episodes ago, and she was saying, like, I had mentioned something about, well, what if the contract says like, oh, the artist is going to be 50-50 split? Well, then she goes, well, 50-50 of what? Is that the merch sales? Is that the royalties for Spotify? Is that the mechanical royalties? How are you getting paid? Is that getting paid? Are you getting paid quarterly? Are you getting paid bi-weekly? I mean, all that stuff comes into play. And a lot of artists don't understand, like, oh, we're just going to split it 50-50. Okay, well, there's like 10 more questions you need to ask in order to like nail it, put the nail in the coffin for that. And a lot of artists and musicians don't really understand that kind of going into things. And I think it's so important for them to know that. And for me, I've always kind of used as like a standard of, if I feel comfortable, like kind of moving on to the next thing, do I feel comfortable teaching this to somebody, like having a one-on-one and say teaching somebody like, oh, about copyrights, or about the kind of like the basics of copyrights, or even like me, I'm a piano player. What are some of the basics of like playing piano? Do I feel comfortable teaching that? Would I feel comfortable teaching piano to somebody? Yes. Okay, then I can probably move on to learning something else, or kind of delegating that out to somebody who maybe knows a little bit more about it.
Yeah, like you've really internalized that, you've really kind of like mastered it for yourself.
And that's the best way to even like continue learning, is by teaching it, because that means if you're teaching it to somebody, you have to make sure that you're giving them the most current and factual information. So that means you have to stay educated on that particular topic, which I think is very important and even beneficial. Keeps your mind going as well. So I want to talk a little bit about your panel that you had mentioned in your thing. That's kind of exciting, kind of a big gig for you.
I'm really excited about it. And I actually haven't like announced it or said anything. So this might be when this might be the place that I am announcing.
Oh, I don't want to have to do that.
No, but that's exciting. It's up. I mean, it's on the website, so it's not really a secret. But I've played South by Southwest many years as a musician with Ingrid, with Elle, with so many other artists. And it's have you ever gone out to South by?
I have not. I haven't. Actually my first music festival was back in November. I went to EDC Orlando because that's where I currently reside, and I actually worked it. But that was my first ever like festival. So
Yeah, well, South by is kind of its own thing. It is technically a
right,
music festival, right? But it's just like a culmination of so many things. So I joke with my friends, I get so excited to go, but then when it's over, you just can't wait to leave, and then you vow you'll never return, and you always come back. At least in my circle and my experiences. But I really love going. And I'm so excited because this year I'm going to be hosting and moderating a panel called Art for Hire. And, I'm still in the little bit of the planning phases for it, but essentially it is going to be about a lot of what we're talking about here, which is, as a creative person, whether you're a musician or producer, songwriter, artist, even on some of the technical sides, like as an engineer or, lighting design, sound, live audio engineer, how do you actually make money? How do you transfer, your value and what you contribute into actually making money? And by that, I mean, I want to go into when do you work on spec versus when do you get money up front, as a producer, for example. How do you decide to do that? How do you determine what your rate is for production or for session work or, if you're being hired to do sound on a tour, how do you deal with that? How do you determine when it's time to raise your rates? How do you negotiate with clients? How do you negotiate with artists? There's just so much to talk about there, and I'm surprised that we're not at a point yet where that's just already out there, I guess. I mean, I understand why it's a little bit of a taboo, because it does sometimes conflict maybe with the idea of like what I was talking about earlier, just being very fluid and open, and you need to be the type of person kind of go with the tide and let someone else's vision lead the way. But when it comes down to money and contracts and a lot of the other stuff we were talking about, sometimes it's two different things, and like how do you make those two coexist? And I really want it to be a like a round table type discussion with a diverse panel, and talking about our experiences and talking about troubleshooting and strategy and touch on as many of these parts of the topic as we can in an hour. So it's,
wow,
I'm really excited. And I'm still kind of putting it together a little bit, but I'm excited in particular to touch on this topic, but also to go back as not a performer this time, more on the sort of industry professional side, and be able to experience the festival like that. So I'm excited about the panel itself. I'm excited about the whole experience.
yeah, that sounds like it's exactly what we've been talking about here this episode, and it comes back to teaching those who are very creative, but they might not understand the business side of industry and how to market themselves and brand themselves. And then once they branded themselves, how do they continue marketing themselves and start making money on their craft and going into the studios and making money drumming or playing guitar or piano or singing or songwriting? How does all that come first full circle for you to actually make a living on that? So that's great. So congratulations on that. Yeah, I know a company that I kind of freelance contract with occasionally here and there. The owner had asked me to speak on his panel, which is going to be during Miami Music Week. So I'm still considering that. I'm kind of up in the air because it's in March and I may have some personal life things that I need to figure out that month. But I'm trying to move. And then my lease is up and my contract at work is up. So I have to make like some big decisions as to what I'm going to do and how I'm going to proceed. So
yeah, it's all happening at once. It sounds.
yeah, of course, it's all got to happen at once when a really good opportunity comes about, and it's all got to happen at once, like you said.
Yeah.
Um, So I want to come back, kind of backtracking a little bit with copyrights, because I know that's another huge thing within music industry, and especially that's probably how I'm assuming you make some of your income is through royalties and that kind of stuff.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, it depends on the situation, but there's definitely a lot of back end in deals that I work on, in projects that I work on, whether it's on the master side or songwriting. And I guess you could sort of say drumming too, because there are some royalties that come in for some of that work too. So yeah, I mean, back end is like a huge part of it. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I know I've done a couple articles because I'm also a journalist, and one of the big features that I just did within like the last month or two was the top, or no, it was the podcast with the lawyer, but I did a huge feature, like a 3,500 word blog post, kind of breaking everything down, and we talked about copyrights. But a couple of months prior to that, and even last year, I did a big episode or a big blog post about the top 5 copyright misconceptions and some of the things that I see and that she sees within the industry that people don't really understand, even musicians. Like, for example, I was on a YouTube video and it was like some remix or some mashup that somebody had put together, and somebody's like, well, who's making the money on this, because there's advertisements being placed on it. And then somebody comments and responds and says, oh, the channel owner. Well, no, not necessarily. Not at all. So that kind of inspired me. I'm like, actually, no, it comes down to the copyright owner. And people are like, oh, well, I can use a song for if it's less than 5 seconds or 3 seconds. And Davey says in the law actually states that there's no set rule that says you can use it for half a second or 10 seconds. So can you give a little more information on how they have kind of played a role and how they've affected, and kind of from the musician standpoint, how important they are to, especially to protect somebody like you in the industry?
Yeah, well, for me as a producer or songwriter, or in projects where maybe I'm doing both, maybe I'm producing it and co-writing, maybe I'm co-producing and co-writing, or even if I'm just doing one or the other, it's like when we structure deals for some of these projects, we're looking at songwriting splits, we're looking at how much production, I guess, like what the rate is up front, for the project or the song, and then what the producer points are on the back end, or what the split is on the back end. And sometimes if there's no money up front, it's like, how are we splitting everything? And there's a lot of different philosophies on this. In my experience, I think all of this is, it depends on from project to project. It's like things are on a sliding scale. If you're working with an artist and they don't have the rates that you want, your going rate as a producer, for example, you can start negotiating. Well, okay, then I guess the back end will be higher. How about we do that? We kind of, for lack of a better way to put it, throw out the traditional producer point structure and say, all right, well, we'll just split the back end a little bit more. And maybe when I make my production rate, then it kind of converts itself into a more traditional, you own the master and you're paying me royalties type situation, or the label's paying me, it's depending on the situation. And then maybe like songwriting can also play into that. Like, I don't think it's fair to cut into songwriting and publishing from an artist if there isn't creative contribution on that end.
Right.
But if someone's coming to you and says, like, I don't have any money, and you just you feel like, it's, as a producer, you think like, okay, we should do one song, we should work together. Maybe publishing is on the table to talk about. Maybe not. Maybe there's like another way to structure it. But I think, like, that's been my experience with back end is sort of helping. Well, I also say too, it's like, it doesn't make any sense for anybody to get 100% or of, a pie that's really going to yield 0% money, so people can fight about copyright, about splits and everything, for forever. But ultimately, you have to kind of look at the project itself. You can feel really good walking away with, like, as an artist, like, okay, well, I got 80% of the master, and I got 80% of the publishing, and I'm killing it right now. And the producer might feel like they were taken advantage of, or vice versa. Producer feels like they don't want to expose themselves. They want to they set themselves up to win, so they're going to be really aggressive and try to take most of the publishing and most of the master percentage, if there's no money up front. But that's not a win-win situation for anybody. I mean, that's just, I think it takes some negotiation, and it takes some, it's like, it should be like a team. I mean, and this goes to go even deeper. I mean, we're talking about kind of copyrights and back end here, but if you're going to work with people on spec where you're really, or even like where the back end is like a heavy part of the, the revenue for this, for the producer or for the artist, you gotta work with people that you can trust. You have to try to work with people you can trust, because it is like a long-term relationship. Because when you're, especially with independent producers and independent artists, when you send the email saying, hey, yeah, we made nice and got this great agreement in place, and you're like, yeah, can you, pay me my quarterly thing? If things go bad, it's going to be tougher to chase that down. You have to really maintain those relationships and work with people that you feel like, on either, whatever side you're on. I think you have to work with people that you really think you can trust for like the long term, even if it's just bare bones, that you'll be able to trust them, that they'll pay you what they said they would, it doesn't mean you have to go on, like these weekend getaways or something and hang out all the time. Like you just have to hopefully go into business with people that, there's like some kind of principle there. But I guess back to your, like original question, I think that like royalties and back end is really important, but equally important is the day to day, as a producer, like getting a rate set up front and really building a value for yourself and marketing yourself properly can be also equally important. I mean, you need to diversify your income. You can't just be a producer, in my opinion, that gets, flat rates up front, and then songs become successful and you're not participating in any of the royalties because you didn't bother to get a lawyer who would write out a contract or, ask for a contract from the artist. But also on the other side, you can't just do everything for spec and just, hope for the best that every artist you work with is going to like get syncs and get, millions of Spotify plays and get, get radio play, and you'll make all your money, in the future.
Right. I think a lot of people think that, with artists these days, it's like a couple social media posts is going to make them internet stars, and they're going to get millions of Spotify streams, and they're going to be making and driving Ferraris next week. Well, that's not necessarily the case. And it comes down to, yeah, you want to do business with people who you trust and can build professional, strong relationships with, but it also comes down to you want to have a strong contract as well with these people for situations like that where, maybe you do piss off the wrong person and things start going downhill. Well, it's not a he said, she said situation. It's, well, you signed on it. This is what is going to happen because this is what we agreed upon. And it's also a good thing to point out because you had mentioned the master and then the publishing, it's also good to point out for those who may not be as aware that there are two different copyrights. There's one for the master and then there's one for the publishing. And the publishing is basically the song or the lyrics and the melodic content, whereas the master is the actual finished file, like the audio file, the one that you would hear like on the radio or the one that you would download and play on your iPod or iPhone or whatever you listen to. That was just kind of good to point out because I know you had mentioned that earlier and talking about like 80% of the publishing or 80% of the master.
I'll say too, to your point also about, having a great contract. It's also enforcing a contract can be tricky sometimes too, because I think you could have a great relationship with the clients, whether it's an artist or a producer, whatever side you're on. You have a great contract that you guys worked at negotiating and everyone feels great. And then, 5 years later, if someone's saying, can you actually please send the payments or whatever it is, that can be tricky too. And even if there's good intention all around. And I don't know if there's a formula for that really, because you don't want to just have lawyers like sending each other emails and, things get nasty. You want to just keep a good communication going and, and hopefully everyone it's like a sort of well-oiled machine and it works, but that's not always the case. But I think there's a lot of nuances that go into that. And good communication is key. And that's something that people don't talk about too much because and even I really think, people stop at like having a great contract is important, but then there's everything, what happens after it's signed and, how do you, there's no music industry police necessarily,
Nope.
So yeah, like that's like, there's a little bit of a gray area there. And I think everybody has their kind of own approach and style to it.
Right. And another point was that I had in that conversation with the entertainment lawyer was she had said, if that contract was done right or written by a lawyer who knows what they're doing, there will be a clause in there that will say that the only time or somebody can audit, the only person that can come in and audit your books and records is a CPA, not just anybody. And it can only be audited or looked at a certain amount of times per year, because you don't want anybody just freely, willy-nilly coming in and looking at it and pulling your books and records. You want to make sure that there's somebody who actually knows accounting and knows what numbers mean and all that stuff and actually really understands that, is looking at it so you can get the right information and then decide how to proceed forward. Is this something worth chasing, or is this something kind of worth pushing under the rug, or how do you want to proceed? And another thing is I put this in a blog post that I had written for edm.com and I don't remember the source of it, but the sources in the blog post was kind of a fun little fact, was there are over 900,000 different streams of royalties for one song. That's to me is mind-boggling, because everybody thinks of Spotify, Apple Music, maybe getting placed in a movie, being placed in a commercial that's played on TV, all that stuff. There's like 4 or 5 right there. Well, what about the other 899,000? It's kind of like that's immense. Can you imagine if somebody could capitalize on all of them or even half of them? That's for one song.
Wow, that's so many.
It blew my mind when I first read that, because I'm like, there's no way 900,000. Who actually took the time to sit down and count out each revenue stream?
Right, that's another question. Yeah, there's a lot of questions. It raises a lot of questions, but
it does raise a lot of questions, and it's probably down to like really, really simple things too, like things that like, oh, you might make a penny off of it, but that's considered revenue. So
it adds up. I mean, when you talk about back end, the pennies add up.
It does.
And like, even for me, I still do sessions, I still do shows. Even though primarily I make my money as a producer, I look at the end of the year and I'm like, wow, like these little maybe like favor kind of gigs that I did with some people and, a couple $100 there. And, the bigger projects I did, everything does add up. And you look at, publishing income, and yeah, the pennies add up. It's like everything is important, which goes to show how important contracts are, and making sure that when you say you're supposed to be getting paid on, streams and sales and, like all known forms of, I mean, there's like a clause that's going to say, basically any commercial exploitation essentially. And that's so important because that's covering that, vast number of ways you can make the money, and you don't know what's going to take off. You can't predict it. It could be a sync, it could be no syncs. You think you're working with an artist that has syncs in the past. I mean, that might change. They might get a different publisher. They might change musical direction, or their next album they do with you is not sync friendly. But yeah, it's just, and I think, and also like being a diverse creative is so important. I mean, you need to have focus, and you need to have good kind of like branding so people understand what it is you do. You can't just say, I do everything, and because that's, experts are important. You don't want to hire a drummer for a tour that's like managing 4 artists, and just that I wouldn't hire a drummer for a tour, that was doing that. Really, I mean, it's confusing. It's like, it's not very focused, and but you diverse in your work, and as an artist you have to be that way too. You can't just expect you're gonna release songs and make money on Spotify, or sales, and you're gonna play shows and make money touring and sell merch and make money. I mean, you have to realize that there's other ways. Like, you may need to do make songs for pitch, whether it's pitching to other artists, or it's maybe it's like actual kind of like jingle type work, commercial work, potentially, just to make some money. I mean, really and truly, if you're getting started, you have to realize that you're not going to make money right away, and that shouldn't really be the goal. That's sort of the result, but that's not what's going to happen. It's a tremendous amount of investment, time and money and energy, and creativity and planning and strategizing before you start making actual money. Whether, even if you are tapping into all these different revenue streams. So yeah, I think no matter where you stand, as a creative person, as a producer, I need to take on work that, like I said, has some back end to it, but also is gonna, pay me right now because I need money today, but also work that I believe in is going to grow over time. Maybe it's like, I'm investing in the artist, I'm investing in the project, to certain degrees, and also working with people that, it's just a one-off thing. I want you to produce a couple songs, and maybe they're going to work with other producers, but great. Maybe I'm not working with people that I think I'm completely creatively connected to on every single level. Like, it's the deepest creative experience I've ever had, but that's okay. Because I think, again, as a producer, and I guess that's my philosophy really, is I'm trying to be more transparent, trying to enforce the vision, understand the vision of the artist, and support it and facilitate that vision for them, whether I'm playing drums or tambourine or I'm producing the whole track, So I guess, like, having, if you want to make a steady income, you need to diversify your streams of income, as much as you can, but find the balance too.
Right. And the secret, I've read in a couple books and blog posts, that the secret to being a millionaire is to having multiple streams of income. And that's what I'm working on currently right now. I'm hoping on building a stream of income through the podcast and kind of branching out from there. I have other jobs that I'm working on, and like, say like ebooks or courses or anything like that. But that's why I'm connecting with people like you and the guests on the show, so I can continue learning from other people's experiences and learning everything that I can from everybody, and creating those sources of incomes and creating those resources for other people to use and learn from. And earlier I had said, I talked about like one of the resources or one of the income streams of the 900,000 being a penny. Well, think about if each of those was a penny or even a dollar, that's $900,000 in say a year. That's you'll be a millionaire within about a year and a half with that attitude. So that's if you think of it like that, like it's putting things into perspective. Like that's not really a lot of money. Like you can buy a big house and a nice car, or you can pay off student loans, or you can donate money, or that's really not a lot of money when you think about it and put things into perspective in the grand scheme of how things are today.
It's true. Yeah. I think like, well, I was going to joke. It depends on where you live too, as to like, as to how much everything is worth, or, what you can do with how much.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, I think that there's still this misconception, or maybe just lack of knowledge about how someone makes money in the music industry that's on the creative side, where the money comes from, how soon they're going to make it, and how you get to the point where you can start making that money. I mean, even as a musician, as a drummer or a guitar player, you got to take gigs for free. You just got to get yourself out there. There's some level of investment. I mean, forget all the like lessons and buying gear and transportation and maybe a practice space and, maybe you're spending money going to see shows so you can meet people, whatever, buying people coffee, buying drinks, like whatever it is you're doing. That's investment. But then once you're even on the scene, you can't say, great, I need, 3,000 a week to go on tour with you or whatever. I mean, you're going to probably go out for barely enough money for that you can survive on. You might even lose money on your first tour with someone. If you can even get a tour, you might not even, your first few shows are going to probably be, very little money because the artists that you're working with don't have budgets yet. They're not making money either. You might see an artist, you play a show and the artist is selling out like seats or, whatever at a venue. Doesn't mean they're walking away with any money. And then from the artist's perspective, yeah, it's so important to understand that all these little things matter. And I like to say to artists, like encouraging them to explore all these avenues. Maybe they're going to kill it live. Maybe they're going to become a very successful live act because people really want to see them live. They kind of like the recordings and they think the songs are good and cool, but when they see them live, that's where it really hits them and connects. So they're going to want to tell their friends and go see them. Maybe they're going to make really good records and get a really good presence on Spotify and YouTube and Apple. And, all the things creatively clicked with the producers and the writers, and it just sounds good. They see them live and it's not that exciting yet because, it would only really work if they had better lighting and, a better band, but they can't afford the band, so maybe their avenue starting out right now is Spotify, is that world. Or more often than not, it's some kind of combination, or maybe there's artists that do really well in sync, but they can't get anyone to go see them live and they can't get their artist projects to take off, but I think you have to try these different avenues and really explore them and push them before you can decide, like it's not working or, and before you develop that kind of tunnel vision of like, my goal is to get 10 million plays on Spotify, or whatever. That could happen, but if it doesn't, that doesn't mean you can't eventually make money. And a lot of major artists that are established, that are, 5-6 albums deep, are having trouble with Spotify and Apple because they're not being playlisted necessarily. And maybe they're like not getting on the tastemaker kind of playlists and things. But they have a really solid fan base. So they're not going to sit there and say, I'm I'm flailing here, I'm being unsuccessful. It's just that avenue is not quite right for where they're at in their career. And chances are they're making, they have other streams that are working for them or have worked. Some bands that tour heavily don't do well on Spotify, and some artists that kill it on Spotify can't put any bodies in the room until, 5 or 6 years into their career. So, you just don't know, and you have to try those different avenues, and you have to be willing to be diverse in your approach.
You kind of answered my next question, which was going to be like, how can somebody get into that? But you answered it by saying you have to kind of explore these different avenues and test the waters and multiple different things just to see what's going to work for you and what's not going to work for you. Like, for example, you said you might be do really well on Spotify, but you can't fill a room of, say, 500 people, or you might be able to fill a room of 6,000 people, but you can only get 1,000 streams on Spotify in 6 months. So you just kind of have to feel out what's going to work for you, what works best for your marketing strategy, what works best for your brand. Maybe your performance, or maybe you do really well performing in front of people. Maybe you have a special act that you just can't portray on streaming. That might be your forte, and that's what you want to focus on. And that's okay, because that's what works for you. And that's what's most important for your success is what's important, what works for you, what makes you feel most comfortable, and what can you do without having to kind of force yourself and like, I got to do this, or I got to make sure that I share my track on Spotify, or I got to make sure I do this or do that, and all this stuff. So that you kind of answered my question by saying all that stuff. So that was great information.
No, and I think you want to know yourself. This is like a whole kind of other aspect to this, is really truly knowing, having a good sense of who you are and what you're good at and what you're trying to communicate to people, what's really important to you, and having really a deep connection with yourself. And that sounds really basic, but it's incredibly hard for a lot of artists and musicians to tap into that. And like I said before, I've worked with these incredible artists, producing them and writing with them, and also playing drums behind a lot of them, where they're so in touch with who they are, and more so than I think anybody. And that's what makes artists special, is they can dig deep, and they can channel that emotion and kind of like digest it and spit it out in a way that we can't, that other, like other civilians can't do. And that's what makes it so special. But the only way they can make good art, really, in my opinion, is being in touch with themselves in that way, and knowing themselves so intimately, even when it's uncomfortable. And I think that really translates to strategy and marketing, because if you're going to decide, like, from a basic thing, if you're going to decide, what am I going to post today on Instagram? What am I going to caption it as? If it isn't really a genuine thought and feeling that you have, I think it's not going to work as well as something that it's not going to connect as well and really draw fans in or draw new listeners in to you as an artist. If it was something that really had some intention behind it, like you wouldn't walk into a room and just start listing your accomplishments. You'd sort of you'd show a bit of your humanity and a bit of your personality, before you get into this, like, and I have a song out and please listen. It's more of a conversation and communicating, just like you would in a song. I tell this to artists a lot too. Just you feel comfortable writing about your feelings and your emotions and situations, and delivering it in a well, thought out kind of package that is a song, that is a production. Approach social media the same way, like approach your live performance in the same way. I mean, there is, but also, like what you said that kind of triggered this to me is the idea of being uncomfortable. And I think that you do, I guess I agree with you and maybe disagree with you in a way too, because I think you have to be in touch with your natural inclinations. Elle King is one of my best friends. I love her so much, and I'm so inspired by her as an artist and person. And she just has this ability. If you follow her Instagram, and I tell everybody I work with about this. I'm always talking about Elle and her Instagram because she posts like the most compelling stuff and the most interesting stories and everything, because it's just her, posting what she wants and what she feels. And I know sometimes she'll sit there and really think about it. I've been in like tour buses and vans and stuff with her when she's like, okay, well, what's the best caption for this? But she gets into it in like a creative way, as if she was writing a song, or as if she was trying to think about what cover she was going to perform on stage, or what the set list is going to be, or like where she wants to go after the show. It's the same level of enthusiasm, so it's all kind of coming from herself, her like inner self, who she truly is as an artist. So I think like, you might, so I guess in terms of being comfortable, you might say like, I don't really do well in front of audiences. I'm not great on stage. Well, that might not actually be true, because maybe you're looking at it from the perspective of the audience. What do they expect from me? What have I seen as a performer? Oh, I can't do any of that. I don't move well on stage. I don't, I don't like, maybe I don't feel like I'm confident in my clothing yet. Maybe I feel like there's just all these things I'm lacking. But you have to, as an artist and a performer, you should turn it around on yourself. Well, what do you have now? What are you comfortable with? What can you do? And dig deeper. And you might find that there's a performer inside of you that is very confident, and maybe your approach to performing is way different than what you imagined it would be. And maybe when it comes to Instagram, a lot of artists say, I don't know what to post. I'm not really good with this. I don't get it. But if you dig deep and you say, I have a passion for reading, like just start with really basic stuff. How can I tie reading into me as a musician? How can I tie it into a photo? And then you're already on the path to figuring out what your content should look like. And it's more in tune with who you are. And it's more likely that you're going to be communicating sincerely, just like you would in a song, to someone on social media, and they're going to pick up on it. And the people that do, literally like it, not just, tap the thing, but people who really are affected by it, are probably going to be interested in you as an artist in some way if you're consistent with your posting. And then they'll probably be interested in your music too, because they're interested in you. They're interested in your posts. If you can make every part of your output sort of tether back to you and your heart and soul and your motivation for what you're doing, then it's going to work. And by work, I mean, it's going to connect with people. Whether it feels uncomfortable to dig deep or not, you might have to dig a little deeper when you're in the studio. Like some people aren't good at being behind a microphone, and we're in a small, and you can hear your voice super well, and we're doing take after take, but you got to find a way to dig into that situation and make it, connect with it in a very intimate way. And I think you can. I think artists who really are dedicated to this and really know that this is all they can do, and or like this is what they have to do, I guess is what it is, will find that connection.
I completely agree, because more kind of a little bit off topic, or kind of a little bit away from music, but just for this podcast, when I started it, I knew that I was going to have to, and I'm a very social person. I can connect and chat with anybody, but I knew that I was going to have to reach out and push myself to be uncomfortable and connect and chat with people that I've never met, I've never seen. Like, for example, you and I, we had never met prior to this. We've never seen each other, anything like that. And I knew that if I wanted to be successful, or I want the show to grow, or to keep doing this, I'm going to have to push myself outside that comfort zone to continue growing and making content and releasing content. And that's just the nature of the beast. It's the same thing with musicians. If you want to advance your career, or you're kind of getting stagnant in something and you're like, I need to do something different, I want to try something else, I don't feel comfortable performing, but I feel like that's the next step, then maybe you should try it. I mean, it's not saying you have to go to a stadium and fill out 70,000 people, like, or 75,000 people, like Queen or Taylor Swift, but you can start out with a small venue, go to a local coffee shop, go to an open mic shop, and just start there and just kind of building up. So then after a year and you're up to, say, a venue of, say, 300 people, and then you're opening for big acts in, say, a 5,000 capacity venue, you're kind of already like, oh, I got this. It's just like performing in front of 3 people or my family. And it just kind of opens the doors to new opportunities.
Yeah. And I've seen that around me with artists that I work with artists that are sort of in the community here in New York and LA. Some artists that sort of get some traction on Spotify, and then, they realize, oh, they want to tour, but like they don't like performing, and maybe it's not working for them. They feel like there's these lofty expectations that they're putting on themselves, or other people are putting on themselves, or venues are putting on them. They need people in the room, to be successful. They need like great stage presence to be successful. The songs need to sound great live, so the band needs to be killing, and the tracks need to be, locked in and dialed in, and the sound. I mean, it's a lot, but like you said, you start small. You do ones, you break it down really to the, just getting through the song. Maybe you might have to just start playing to a couple friends and like inviting people over and performing. You might, whatever it takes, really, like to get to that stage. But breaking it down is so important, because it all can seem really impossible to some people. You look at people's Spotify plays, and there's so many like metrics out there now that you can seemingly measure your success or failure with, which I think is dangerous. Whether it's likes or comments, followers or Spotify numbers, and that doesn't really tell the whole story. Like, we know now that, these aren't, no one's auditing. I mean, this is kind of controversial, but no one's auditing Spotify for where these plays are coming from. And no one's auditing, I mean, somewhat with Instagram, I think they're stopping the like auto adding programs and things, but you look at someone who has all these followers and you're like, oh, well, I don't have that, and I don't have all these likes and comments. Like, does anyone even care? Or just on a basic level, you go to see someone's show, like a peer of yours or someone you respect, and they're selling it out and they're promoting it, and people are so excited to go, and everyone's RSVPing on Facebook. It just seems like impossible, but you can't, I mean, this is, I guess we're getting into like another thing. You can't measure your success or failure or how solid you are by looking over your shoulder. You just have to really be honest with yourself. And it just goes back to digging deep. Are you honestly feeling that your things aren't working, or you're not achieving your goals because of how you feel about it, or because what someone else is doing next to you or in front of you? Based on what these metrics are. And a lot of times that's not the full picture, and then you're already worried about someone else too much than you should be about yourself, and you're not focused on the right things, I think. And it's healthy to be competitive in a lot of ways. I mean, all these artists too I work with that I've been talking about, and many more, everyone has a healthy level, or sometimes unhealthy level, of competition that drives them, that motivates them, and it can be positive. But when it's this like kind of crushing, like suffocating type of competitive thing, where it's really about your own insecurities and less about reality, of the situation, that's not going to help you judge, yourself truly. Like, where do you stand? Where can you improve?
Yeah.
It's just, yeah.
That's a really good point, is how you can't measure your success by what somebody else tells you, because you said it in your own, it's your success. It's not your friend's success. It's not your manager's success. It's not your publicist's success. It's your success, and you have the right and you should be able to decide what you do with that success. And measuring yourself by saying, hey, I want to have as many streams as Drake on Spotify, or I want to sound like Drake. Well, in my opinion, I don't want you to sound like Drake. We already have a Drake. Let's create somebody else. We already have a Taylor Swift. Let's create somebody else. I don't want you to sound like Taylor Swift. And that's why I try not to compare other artists that I work with to other artists. Like, oh, it sounds like this person. Actually, no, it sounds like John Doe, or it sounds like this person. It sounds like whoever it is, because that's the sound that they're achieving. And it's not like comparing it. And you can't measure that success by comparing, like, oh, Taylor Swift has, hundreds of millions of streams and I only have 1 million. Well, that's okay, because Taylor Swift is Taylor Swift. She has her sound. She's done her tours. She's done her own branding. She's got her whole image and her own audience. You are you. You need to tailor yourself. And you think of it like, coming kind of backtracking to earlier in the show, we had talked about the different streams of royalties and how to make money. And you think of, like, have you seen the show 2.5 Men? Yeah. So you got, like, look at Charlie Sheen. He's somebody that writes jingles and he's got this massive mansion. He writes jingles for commercials and he makes all this money. He's done very well for himself. You have people like that who are kind of behind the scenes. You don't always have to be in the spotlight to be successful, either financially or even just in the public eye. If you want to be, like, financially successful, write jingles. You don't have to write full-length songs. There's all kinds of different things you can do to measure your own success and kind of create your own success, rather than just writing music, releasing it on Spotify and SoundCloud, and then touring and kind of the usual stuff. There's all kinds of other things you can do to grow yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. You need to keep your eyes open, and
Right.
and so you can see when these opportunities happen. I mean, you might, and it takes some time to figure that out. It might not be like your first show is, or first few shows, or first year of shows is like your greatest, and you suddenly see, oh, I could, maybe this is my ticket. It might take more time, and it might be more subtle. And you shouldn't give up on one or the other. And really, it's like you're trying to be a complete artist too, and complete kind of creative in whatever facet you're working in. You want to be the type of person that can perform and play. I try to continue to play live, even if it's not, my number one source of income or my, main focus these days, or at least presently. Not like it's never going to happen again. I mean, I might get a call tonight that I'm going to go on tour with somebody tomorrow. I mean, that's how it works. But so I haven't, like, closed that door, but, I still need to I feel like it's important for me to keep a foot in the live environments and make sure that I'm still sharp there, and still do session work and still work with people, even though I'm not out, like, hitting up producers. Hey, I'm in town, please, like, if you got another record coming up, I'd love to do it. I'm here, or, trying to hit up new artists to get on tour, or talking to MDs. I'm not really doing that right now. But it's still important that I keep a foot in that world for perspective too, but I think, like, I want to continue for me to be as complete as I can be. I want to understand business more, than I do now. Even I want to get deeper into that. I want to still be evolving as a musician, getting better. I want to keep pushing my production chops, get more into mixing. That's something I'm working more on, because that's more on the technical side. And I didn't come up working in a studio, so everything I've picked up has been on my own. But there's so many ways, and as a songwriter, work harder, just diversify. Don't just write one style. So as an artist, I think it's almost like if you really want to do this now, there's not really a choice. You have to diversify. You have to be well-rounded, and also sort of what you're saying about having your own voice. We don't want the next Drake, or we don't want the next Taylor Swift. We have them. It's like, kind of, not to be dark, but it's like sort of like suicide to follow trends, to say, I want my album to be just like that thing that just came out, that's on the charts or that isn't on the charts. Like, you have to dig deeper, and songwriting, vocally, production style, because the trends. I mean, let's be honest. Like, and as a producer and someone in electronic music, there's like, the trends move so fast that they're already over. I mean, then the next thing is there. I wouldn't even say in pop music there's certainly, you can in hindsight look back at like, what hip hop has done to pop music, and how it's influenced it, and the different sub genres of pop music. And it's no longer really there was a New York Times article that kind of broke this down really well. The what we consider these like superstars of like pop are kind of there, but they're not really there like they used to be. I'm doing a really bad job of breaking this article down, but essentially there's just so many different subgenres of pop, and there used to be this like shiny, bright Katy Perry thing, and like, that was, there's all these pop stars there, and then there's like indie, and now it's just so subdivided into genres that there's not one sound you can chase after. You have to really, and to stand out, you have to dig so much deeper and just follow your intuition. And if it comes out being something that sounds familiar to other people, that's not bad necessarily. I think people still need some kind of like a North Star. Like, they're going to compare things, whether you think they should or not. They're going to draw conclusions, and that's not your concern, I think, as an artist. I think you just need to dig into what your true influences are. I was talking to a songwriter a few months back, and she's like, I've been listening to so many, listening to New Music Friday and listening to trying to follow the charts and what's popular, and trying to like match those styles, and I can do it, but like, it's just not working. And I just told her to start listening to the stuff she grew up listening to. Go take a step back. Like, why are you excited about music? Why do you sing the way you sing? Who do you look up to, and not who are you trying to follow? Who's a part of you, and draw from that. Not copying those old influences per se, but just start, your frame of reference is off. Try to like center it back, like when you're centering your map on your iPhone, center it back to where you are right there, as opposed to where you're trying to get to, or what's happening around you. And that's where you're going to not only make unique art and unique music and unique production, and you'll be open to like trying something that's a little more personal to you, but you're going to make stuff that is going to communicate a piece of you better than if you're trying to follow these other paths, And I think that also goes into the music side, the business side of it too. If you're looking at how someone else got successful, or, how good things are going for another artist, and you're trying to like, oh, well, I got to get my numbers up. I got to get my likes up. What do I do? That's, you're still following, you're following behind, you're not really creating your own path and listening to what is in front of you, and who you are. And again, it's like, it's hard to do this. It takes a lot of reflection, and it might take some artists some stepping back, I think, and they need to reevaluate a little bit, but you should constantly evaluate these things as you go, I think. And all the great artists I know are doing that perpetually. Sometimes it's painful. You think you're onto something, and you realize like, oh, I don't really identify with that. I'm trying to do something different now. And that can be risky, but risky is good. I think playing it safe, trying to fit in, is just totally dangerous. I mean, that's like that's not good.
No, I completely agree. Uh, Everything that you had said is deviating from everything and remaining creative and trying to kind of carve your own path. It's very important, and kind of creating the next wave of success and the next, who knows, you might even set the next standard or create a little genre or your own little genre within a genre, or that's something you want to be memorable by. You want your fans and the industry to remember you by something like, oh yeah, he's the founder of this genre, or he did this album and it did this. There's all kinds of unique things. Like you look at like the Beatles stuff. Everybody references the Beatles music because it was so unique and ahead of its time and complex.
So weird.
It's so, I mean, granted, anybody that's sober could never write anything like that. But you just look at some of the Beatles stuff, it's so experimental, and you listen to like put it on with headphones, and you've got like the kick drum in the left side, and like that's just like a mixing no. It's like, what the hell are they doing? But at the same time, it works because it's so creative, it's so unique, it was so Beatles sounding. And that's what makes artists stand out, and we don't have that type of creativity like we did with the Beatles anymore, unfortunately. It's just because everything, in my opinion, everything is just, it's so easy to buy a computer and get GarageBand or download some type of freebie digital audio workstation and start putting sounds together and then uploading it, and then people learn from that. And it's granted, it opens the doors for a lot of people in creating different sounds and genres, and that's how things get started. But at the same time, it's become very saturated, and everybody likes this sound, and I want to be like this person, and I really want to make dubstep music, or I really want to make pop music, or and they kind of go to those signature people within those genres, and that's just who they copy. They just pick songs and they just like, oh, I know how to make that sound, or I know how to do that chord progression, or I know how to play guitar like that. It's nothing, it's all just kind of cookie cutter stuff. And instead of playing the same chord progression, they might make it a seventh chord, or they might change the inversion of it, or something. It's nothing creative anymore. It's all kind of just oversaturated, and nobody's really thinking outside the box, unfortunately.
Well, I think there's like a couple things about what you said that that are interesting to me. This isn't like a fully formed theory here, but maybe there's a thing about the nature that music is being made with electronics, and computers, like what you're saying, and like something like Splice, which I don't use, and I have nothing necessarily against it just on its own. But if you have two people that play drums, for example, let's say play the same beat, they're going to sound completely different, even if they're playing the same pattern. You're going to track them. You could use the same microphones, even same producer, same tempo, same everything, even the same drums. Let's just say it's the same drum kit. They're just going to sound different. They're going to play it different. There's like this human touch that's there. So when then you put that into guitar playing and the way people play and their sound. I mean, then you add the other variables that are always going to be there, like the equipment that's being used and the ability of the musician to hold the instrument. You are going to have two bands playing the same song, and they're just going to sound different. So there's almost like a way that, and that's not like this isn't like a deep concept or anything, but like, when you, like you said, you have people just sort of opening up their DAW and like loading in samples and snapping it to a grid. It's going to sound exactly the same if two people do that. And it's almost like the nature of the way music is created on the electronic way it isn't immediately different. It's so you sort of have to not work harder, but maybe be more deliberate about trying to shape your sound, or find your identity or your sound in the electronic world than say with a guitar, because you're gonna, or drums. I'm just thinking about this now, so this I might not even agree with this tomorrow. I might disagree with myself, but I think maybe there's something about that, where the way just the creative medium, I guess, is a little more monotonous, I guess. Whereas if we're using acoustic instruments, there's so many variables, personality touches and everything. And also, with like manipulation with pitches and auto tune and all these other Melodyne and everything, that sort of also makes everyone have the acceptable way to sing is in pitch and in tune and in time and everything. And that limits the possibilities of, a singer coming up and saying, well, I don't really sing like that, but that's what I love to listen to. That's like what is on all the playlists that I'm coming up with and that are coming out. So I'm going to like kind of copy that style, and that's the one to aspire to, that's what's sort of being presented. I mean, it's not that all the old music and the other music and music that is happening now that is still very personal and like has a bit of soul and is a little imperfectly perfect, doesn't exist. It does exist. It's there, but you're right. Like a Drake record just sounds so precise and perfect, even though, I mean, in my opinion, there's a lot of care that's being put into it that makes it a beautiful piece of art, and on its own in that genre. But yeah, for like someone who's starting out, they're going to hear that and be like, oh, okay, well, this is what, maybe this is what I should be trying to aspire to. And, I don't know. I think that's kind of disappointing, but, despite if it's the Beatles that you're listening to, I'm working with a couple artists right now that are like, they grew up listening to the Stones and the Beatles and artists like that, and they're given their age, they, you wouldn't expect that. So they're still people that are coming up and listening to, the old school stuff that has that like, personality in it. I mean, Elle came up listening to the old stuff. I mean, that resonated with her. She's a little bit younger than me, but she was listening to stuff that like I wasn't even like as hip to, like, Jackie Wilson and all that stuff as she was. Also, she loves Drake. I mean, she's a huge Drake fan and is influenced by him too. But like, I think it's that just spoke to her, and it is a little bit problematic if the music that speaks to you as a new artist is electronic music, because it can be more difficult maybe to find the personality in it, potentially.
Right. And
That's my perspective anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. I like the fact that you're kind of in the pop music realm, and I like that I'm kind of more in electronic music. And we both have different takes on a lot of like how production is done. And so for me, I'm experiencing the electronic scene day in and day out, and you're experiencing like how the like kind of pop music side is, and kind of the singer-songwriter side is done. And don't get me wrong, I love listening to that stuff and pulling inspiration, and when I can turn off like the heavy bass and completely no dynamic music, I will, and I'll put on some classical music or some singer-songwriter acoustic stuff. But at the same time, you have to kind of take an appreciation for both, because I do listen to some music where it mends and blends the best of both worlds. And how, like, even in school, I went to school for music production, and I learned a lot of interesting techniques in sound design and production. For example, like, there was one time where we were in the studio, we recorded a drum set for one of my classmates' tracks, and we had the two mics in the kick drum, which is pretty standard. You have one to kind of get the thwap of it to kind of outside the drum, and then you have the internal one to kind of get the oomph. But the microphone that we had used didn't give us enough kind of thump and low end. So what did we do? My instructor helped us out, and we basically created a sound to kind of sit below. It was basically a low end sine wave that was pitched to the drum and we just added that, or we took another sound and we just kind of filtered it out to just take the low end so we could get that low end punch. And so it's nice for that realm of like sound design and kind of coming up with things quickly and being able to kind of achieve a sound that you want quickly. But I think a lot of artists, it affects a lot of artists' sound because a lot of them, they have such basic sounds from the default from a lot of these synthesizers or samples that nothing has ever had to be designed. It's just kind of, oh, you just do this, you turn this knob and you throw on this LFO and it does this and that's what you do. And there's really, it sounds like artists A, B, and C sound just like D, E, and F, so it takes away from that creativity, but at the same time, it really can kind of blend together, especially if it's done right. And there's a few artists that are doing it kind of where they're doing it right, but there's a lot of them more often than not that are kind of just taking ideas and kind of just pulling them and copying. I want to sound like this person. And like you had said, it's good to pull inspiration. Like Elle is a huge Drake fan, and that's great because Drake is a very talented person. He's incredibly talented. I don't listen to him on a day-to-day basis. I listened to his album when it came out, but past that, I haven't listened to it since. I'm just not a Drake fan. I've never been into that kind of music. But there are certain elements that I heard and can appreciate. And if I were to write an electronic song or even any song, I'd be like, I really like what Drake did. Let me kind of use that as kind of a template and start there and then see if I can come up with something on my own. But a lot of people don't really think past that. They're just like, oh, I'm going to get what Drake did and just that's what's going to be mine.
Right. And it's like, oh, that's working. Great. That's good. It could be for, business reasons or, they think they're strategizing in a good way or it is like coming from a creative thing that's inspiring to me. So I want to aspire to that, but yeah, it's like, it's definitely problematic. You got to deep dig, you got to start with those inspirations, but you got to kind of funnel it through yourself and sort of move away from it eventually.
Right. I think one thing that would kind of, it's happened to me before and I went back into the song and I kind of critiqued it, but I've uploaded a song and they're like, oh, this is just like so-and-so, or this is exactly like, or this sounds just like this song. I'm like, that was not my intention. And second of all, I've never even heard of that song. So I'm not sure how it happened, or I've never heard of that artist. So now I'll have to check them out and just see so I can kind of come up with my own little flow and move forward. But that's kind of one thing that kind of kicks me as a musician. And even I'm assuming other artists is like when you upload a song and like, oh yeah, that sounds just like Drake's song, especially when you can pinpoint to like a certain portion within the song. Like, yeah, it sounds just like that. I'm like, that's not good because Drake had it first and now you're copying it. And it, before you know it, you get a cease and desist letter from Drake's lawyer. That's the last thing you want.
Oh man, I know. All that stuff. Yeah, I mean, you can be really intentional about how your process and your influences and references and think you're really onto something. Yeah, you could really believe you're onto something unique and original, and it comes out the other end, and the audience, the listeners are just like, oh, this, wow, I like Drake too. Cool, it's cool that you like sound like that, and I don't know. There's nothing you can do as to how people are going to receive something, or even if they're going to love it or hate it. I think I always say to artists that I'm producing, we just need to be as deliberate as possible. If you if you want this chorus to be big, it needs to be a big chorus that is written to be big. The production needs to signal that this is big, and the mix needs to, carry it through. That's like a very general
right
example, but being the type of music I usually end up producing, and my tendencies more work with that philosophy that I want to be as clear to the listener what is happening in the song or in the production as I possibly can, and also sending signals about style and kind of references too, and try to be clear with that. If we're trying to make this fit, not specifically fit onto a playlist, like that's not really the goal of producing a song, but if we're trying to be in the lane of like give the listener a feeling that they would get from a classic record, then I want to maybe incorporate, certain drum sounds that are like sound like samples from an old hip hop thing, or I'll create the samples myself, the way the vocal effects, you can put on slapback and things like that. And that's just going to immediately read as like a type of throwback classic sound to a listener that doesn't even know what they're listening, that doesn't understand those production techniques, but you hear like a slapback vocal, you're not going to think about Drake. You're going to think about like a 50s, like Eddie Cochran or like Buddy, or like any of the, maybe some stuff that was like, could be like a Motown sound too, that's like dark and kind of saturated. And, but also if you, I'll use some trap, elements or 808s in productions that might be really heavy and like more industrial sort of sounding stuff, just to signal that this is a modern record, that I'm not trying to, and these are subtle cues. Like I don't even expect a listener to hear it and be like, oh, I hear trap hats, this must be, fresh. Like that's not going to work. But it's like subtle kind of cues that I think listeners sort of pick up on, and they might, and it might, sometimes it backfires, sometimes they might think, oh, this record sounds too, like the mix sounds off, and I know the mix isn't off. So maybe, I've run into that a couple times when I'm trying to push boundaries. I'm trying to be a little more, in my mind, I'm trying to be creative. And in the artist's mind, we're trying to do something unique, but it might come across as like, could be confusing to people, and that maybe it wasn't as deliberate as we thought it was going to be. So I guess like back to your point, like, you can really think that you're onto something totally fresh and exciting, and it might not be as widely received as that way. It's a challenge to be unique. It's a challenge to find your own voice and then execute it and deliver it, very well. You could have a great idea, but the execution of the production and the, into the mixing and mastering has to really follow that line very well, for it to work. And I hope that all the records I work on do have some familiarity to listeners. They do say, oh, this kind of sounds like this other thing that I like, or that, I'm listening to, or whatever. Because I think that's like, that means they're relating to it, and that's important. That's like more important to me than groundbreaking sounds, or like, the ego behind trying to be like, create a new subgenre or something. I mean, that could be a good goal. And I think every producer is trying to like carve out their own sound and style, to, and certainly artists, but producers too, trying to bring something to the conversation and shift the paradigm maybe a little bit. And I've been involved in some records that I've worked on in different capacities that have done that to some degree, and that's amazing. But you never know how it's going to be received. You never know how people are going to what they're going to project onto it. But that's just sort of like the nature of art. I think.
That's kind of with art and in general, and especially with music, is some of my favorite songs are the ones that I can relate to the most, and I'm able to relate to the most. I think that's very important with musicians and music, and like you said, with art in general, is even painting. You see a piece of art and you can relate to it. Like you see, like for me, if I walk past a painting that's got a big old barn and open fields and a nice sunset, it kind of brings me back home, because that's kind of the environment that I grew up in, is, open land, farms all around the town, and barns and all things like that. Everything is relatable, and it kind of comes full circle. So, and like you said, it's very difficult to be unique, but at the same time, it's not impossible. It's not impossible to be unique. It's very there's still a lot out there. There's still a lot of creative things you can do to make yourself stand out and become unique, and really also become relatable as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think that's kind of a good point to kind of wrap things up. We've been talking for 2 hours now. This is by far the longest podcast I have ever done. So I'm so glad we had a great conversation, and I had ran out of questions like an hour and a half ago. So this is perfect. I'm glad we were able to go off on this tangent. And like I said, this is the longest podcast I've done so far. So congratulations on that, on the first longest podcast.
Sorry, or you're welcome. I'm not sure, but
no, it's definitely a you're welcome. Even though I have to be up early tomorrow to get into work. I've been doing a bunch of overtime, 12-hour shifts. So got to pay some bills, and Christmas gifts and credit cards don't go hand in hand, as I tell my manager. So how can the listeners keep up with you and follow you on all of the amazing projects that you're working on, and ask any questions that you maybe had said something on within the show?
Well, I'm very open. If anyone emails me, I try to respond to people and give some insight when I can. I'm in New York City, so if people are coming into town and want to grab coffee or something, I'm pretty open as far as that goes. But I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Elliot Jacobson. It's all one word, and my website is Elliot-Jacobson.com. Somebody has Elliot-Jacobson.com. It's not me. I don't know.
You didn't get it quick enough. You weren't quote unquote creative enough to get there first.
Just unique at all.
No.
So there's that. But yeah, those are probably the best. I'm on Facebook too, but I kind of use that more for like hey, I am looking for something right now. Does anybody have this, or open call sort of audition stuff. So, but yeah, I'm out there, and I'd love to connect with people, and I'm trying to make it a point this year to maybe give back, or I don't know what you call it, but just be a little more proactive, with the panel and doing this with you, Lennon, and kind of getting out there even more. So this is exciting.
Yeah, and I'll put all of your links and stuff. And if you want, you can just send all of your links to me in an email, and I'll be sure to include them in the show notes. And like I said, I'm trying to do the same thing. I'm trying to educate people more on all the stuff that I learned. Rather, it's not as much as I want to or as hope to, but I'm still learning, and I want to share the information with all of the guests and everybody listening, and those who will be listening in the future, and even the knowledge that I have with the guests on the show even. So yeah, I learned a lot from you, and we definitely share a lot of the same viewpoints, and even disagree on some things, but we had some good conversation there, and by far probably one of my favorite conversations on the show. So it was a great conversation. I really appreciate you sharing all of your insight and your story with us. Yeah, that's pretty much all I got for you.
Thanks, Lennon. Well, thanks for having me again. Yeah, let's definitely keep in touch.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of When Life Hands You Lemons. I very much hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Elliot and all of the things we had talked about, because it got pretty intense there when we were talking about some of the contracts and copyrights and some of the misconceptions that the music industry kind of portrays, as well as how technology has kind of evolved and how we can kind of grow artists, and artists can kind of use that to their benefit to kind of grow their brands and sound, because there's so many different avenues of revenue and growing yourself within the music industry that a lot of artists kind of get caught up and hung up on I need to write music, release it on Spotify, and kind of just wait for the streams to grow and me to get added to playlists, when sadly that's not the only thing or not sadly, but good thing that's not the only thing that you can make money on in the music industry. And with last week's episode with Jasmine Valencia, she talks about how we can brand or work with sponsorships, and that's a good way to make revenue as well for musicians. So I hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Elliot. All of his links and social media will be in the show notes below. So if you have any questions for him or want to follow up with anything he had said in the show, you can definitely reach out to him. My links as well will be in the show notes below. And again, I just want to remind you to sign up to my mailing list, as it greatly helps me notify you when new episodes like this one are live, as well as send over some motivational tips and tricks in life and or the music industry. There is also my Patreon account that will help me grow the show, and there's different tiers there that can allow you to work with me or just kind of give back to the show so I can grow it and continue making it better for all of you. I would also appreciate a 5-star rating and review within Apple Podcasts or whichever platform you listen to podcasts in, as it will greatly help me grow the show, as well as help it be discovered by new listeners. Lastly, there is a guest request form in the show notes as well, so if you or somebody you know would be a good guest for the show, please fill it out and or send it over to them so that I can reach out, and if they're a good fit for the show, I will definitely get something booked and we can consult and get something booked to be a guest. So I hope that you enjoyed my conversation with the Elliot Jacobson, and I will see you next week on When Life Hands You Lemons.